For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jesse Betend, and this is The High Ground. On this show, we talk to leaders of the cannabis industry, CEOs, politicians, increasingly scientists, about the forces shaping the cannabis industry. What CEO doesn't want a crystal ball, right? It's hard to imagine a leader of any kind passing up a chance to look into the future and predict the next industry-shaking event. And while I may not have a crystal ball, I do have the very next best thing, at least on the subject of vaping. Arnaud Dumas de Rauly is the founder and the CEO of the Blinc group. He's also the chairman of the International ISO standards on vaping products and the chairman of the European CEN standards on vaping products. He's also back from the future. Literally, Europe is like 7 or 8 hours ahead of us, to explain what the US cannabis industry can learn from Europe's vaping standards and how it just might save not only your business, but lives in the process. See, with each state approaching cannabis legalization slightly differently, we've ended up with this patchwork of laws that are overzealous in some areas and completely fail in others. For instance, did you know that in most cases, companies are only required to test their isolate in liquid form, not the actual vapor that's going into your lungs? We'll dig into that, why some legal vapes still contain heavy metals, and how cannabis can avoid some of the pitfalls that the US nicotine industry is currently working through. Arnaud, thank you so much for joining me.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Can I start? So it's an impressive list beyond the co-founder and CEO of the Blinc group related to cannabis and vaping.
Yeah, this is something I struggle with when I'm answering interviews. It's like, which hat am I putting on? So I am also chairman of the ISO standards for vaping products and chairman of the CEN standards for vaping products. Those are the European standards. These are two voluntary roles. I am not paid to do it. I was nominated and elected by the member countries on the ISO board and the European member states for the CEN board.
I recently did an interview with head of a lab in California that just did a buyback program where they partnered with a dispensary and purchased, in this case, black market vapes, exchanged them for cleared, tested ones, and did some testing just to kind of see what was out there. And what they found was 80% of the vapes that they collected through this program and tested were not fit for consumption. There were a range of different things. Some of that included unsafe actual packaging or cartridges themselves. So I was wondering, where exactly do heavy metals come from? And what exactly is causing that?
So it's a very big question, and just to step back a little bit and explain to anyone who's listening, when people buy a product, the product is not the oil, it's not the hardware, it's the combination of both. And I think that's the premise to really understanding how all of these products interact. Now, to answer specifically the question about heavy metals are in the air we breathe. They're basically everywhere, in more or less higher or lower concentrations. Now, in terms of vaping products in the cannabis world, heavy metals can be present in the water to grow the plants. They can be present in the soil to grow the plants. They can be present in the pesticides to grow the plants. And obviously, when you're talking about a vaping product, you go through the processing phase, and all of that trickles down to the oil itself. The other area where these heavy metals can be present is in the hardware. Now, the interaction between the oil and the hardware itself is that the pH of cannabis oil, it actually corrodes a little bit of the hardware, and some of those constituents in the hardware can end up what we call leaching into that oil. And that's where it becomes very, very important to understand exactly what the raw materials in the vaping devices are.
How prevalent is that in the industry currently with licensed companies?
Well, that's a big issue, and it's in part due to the way the regulations were built, but also in part due to the nature of the market, especially here in the U.S. The product and the heavy metal that leaches the most in most of the cases is lead. So the material that has been historically used is a material called H59. It's a brass alloy that contains roughly between 2.6% or 2.8% of lead. And the way these products are manufactured is something called electroplating. So you have that H59 material, and then it's electroplated on the outside. Some of them are double electroplated. That electroplated is there to avoid that leaching. The problem is the pH of cannabis oil in 99.9% of the cases kind of eats through those layers of electroplating and ends up chewing away at that material called H59. So with a lot more concern about these products, there's another material that is used that's called H59B1 or B2. A lot of the Chinese manufacturers that we get emails from, 25 emails a day, say we use lead-free material. Well, that's a lie. It is not lead-free material. It's just that instead of having between 2.6 or 2.8% lead, it has less than 0.05% lead, which technically is not supposed to leach. So in practice, what happens? A processor fills a cartridge, then sends it off to testing. If the testing is done within 24 hours, there probably hasn't been enough time for that to leach. And keep in mind that while I'm speaking about this, I'm assuming that there is no heavy metals in the oil itself to begin with.
Sure.
So that's called the controller oil. Now, when we look at these products after 24 hours, they have no lead and they're deemed marketable. The problem is leaching happens over time. And I can guarantee you now, if we go pick up legal products in the US, in legal dispensaries that have been on the shelves for 15, 30, 60 days, there will be heavy metals inside. There will be lead if the materials used are H59 or H59B2.
So it's potentially possible for a product to pass a test, at the beginning of its life cycle, sit on a shelf, and then fail the same test.
Exactly. It's called stability testing. And no one has ever been doing this. So we've been doing it since its inception because we've been in the vaping space for 10 years and previously on the nicotine side. So we understand how all of this works and have switched all of our products are stainless steel because stainless steel doesn't have any lead in it. So we're sure it cannot leach. And I think that's a very, very important distinction. And I still don't understand why all the other manufacturers are not doing this because, of course, the products in and of themselves cost a little bit more. And that has always been an issue, especially on the West Coast, is an issue of pricing, and people are bartering for 2 cents. But is the safety of your consumers worth that 2 cents? Is the liability of having a class action lawsuit in 3 years' time because someone has been using the same brand of products for 3 years and has lead poisoning? Is that an issue? I think it's the priorities have switched. And what we've seen with phase 3 testing in California with the vaping crisis is that the industry itself, as well as consumers, are a lot more tuned in to quality, to safety, to innovation, and really understanding traceability aspects, for instance, because it's something that involves their safety. And just a segue into another aspect that's really dear to our company is emissions testing. So once again, we're looking at the oil here. Everything we've just spoken about is just the oil. You have to realize that you go through an entire state change. You're turning it from an oil to an aerosol. That changes completely the products. We have already tested products that tested as non-detected in the oil, but in the end, it's detected in the vapor that people are inhaling. And that, to me, is just really common sense. And we don't understand why this industry has been so focused on testing the oil itself when it goes through a state change and not at all worrying about emissions testing. I've been going around the country speaking to labs and offering them puffing machines and asking them what are emissions. Half of them are laughing and telling me, well, what's a puffing machine?
So for those that don't know, first, what is a puffing machine?
So a puffing machine is a machine that will simulate the use of a vaporizer. So you can set up the puffing machine to take one puff that's going to last 5 seconds, maybe every half hour, or maybe every 10 minutes. And it allows to collect the aerosol that comes out, which you can then analyze and see what components are present in there. It's like when you're looking at water, you heat it, it turns into vapor. You're changing state, and that vapor has different properties than the water originally.
So what you're saying is that nobody is actually testing that?
Exactly. No one's testing what's coming out of these devices. No one's testing what people are putting in their lungs.
How can that be? I mean, I know you said you don't quite understand why no one is checking that, but do regulators not understand the difference?
Well, that's a lot of the answers I was getting a few years back is, oh, well, the regulation doesn't ask us for it, so we're not doing it. But the regulators are becoming a lot more in tune to this. In fact, I'm part of a couple of formal and informal policy committees for different states, and I can tell you that by the end of the year, there are a couple of states that are going to be implementing this.
This was basically exactly the issue that the nicotine vape industry went through. For those that don't understand that, can you kind of trace exactly what happened there and what the concern would be with it potentially repeating in the cannabis industry?
Well, the concern is first of all, the economics of it. I mean, if you look at nicotine vaping and how well it's accepted around the world, I think the U.S. is the only country that really hasn't accepted it and that is demonizing it. In countries in Europe, you are reimbursed by Social Security if you switch from smoking to vaping. The state gives you money because they know it's safer. It has proven to be safer. It's not 100% safe, and anyone in their right mind will never tell you that inhaling something that's not supposed to be there in the first place is 100% safe. But it's still 95% safer. There are multiple research pieces that have been going around for the past 10 years. Yet in the US, for some reason, hint to lobbying and big pharma and big tobacco, this hasn't happened. And it's really foolish that we are here right now. And right now, all the products are being banned or have to go through a stringent PMTA process that's going to cost multiple $1 million per SKU, and that not a lot of the companies, except the big tobacco companies that actually have the cash, are able to go through. Now, drawing a parallel to cannabis, do we want this to happen to cannabis? No, we don't. So we need to be proactive about it. And that's the big issue. We were very proactive in Europe about safety standards, about getting these emissions tests done. Here in the US, no one is proactive. And again, referring by the answers I was getting a couple of months back and a couple of years back, well, why should we do it? The regulator's not asking. It's not about, we have to switch this mindset of being reactive to more proactiveness and really understanding what people are putting in their lungs. Now, the caveat to that is that as an industry, in terms of research, we just don't have the knowledge right now about all of the cannabinoids and everything that's going on. So it's going to take more time moving forward to really identify. And for all I know, maybe we're going to figure out in 3 years' time that myrcene shouldn't be inhaled. So we're going to have to figure out how to produce oils with no myrcene or replace it with another terpene that's safer. I'm not saying that's the case. I'm just giving an example here. So all of this has to work hand in hand, and research has always been hampered. So now that it's kind of unlocking, hopefully the fact that cannabis has become essential is going to help in that. But we really need to be more proactive and understand how we can preserve this industry from what happened to the nicotine vaping industry.
So what was different with your experience in Europe? Were companies more receptive and understanding of this? How did regulations or, You said they were sort of more proactive. What did that actually look like?
It's about getting the industry together, getting the funds together, getting the regulators to have a seat at the table, getting the consumers to have a seat at the table. Standards, whether they're ISO standards or European standards, the basis of it is building consensus between consumers, between industry, and between regulators. This hasn't been done properly in the U.S. So this is something that we need to really keep our finger on the pulse of moving forward and make sure that everyone is aligned in objectives. And some states are doing it very well. Colorado, for instance, is doing this very well. Some other states are slowly getting there, but it's really it's an ongoing effort, and it's sometimes about putting aside what's good for your business as a business owner and making sure the industry is sustainable and will continue to grow in the future.
When it comes to safety, what do you want to see specifically happen? Do you have any specific goals in terms of changing some of this stuff?
I think the low-hanging fruit is really on the products themselves. There's, for instance, I was speaking earlier about the use of stainless steel. It's a no-brainer when you're talking about safety and security, yet no one else is doing it. There's the use of different types of materials. There's the research you can do into those materials. One of the biggest problems, for instance, with vaping hardware, is that the distributors here in the U.S. are literally have no understanding of the supply chain. That's what we have set up over the past 10 years with our experience in China. We've set up a resilient and redundant supply chain. For every raw material, we have 4 suppliers, 2 major and 2 minor. Our assembly factories are subcontractors, and we have 4 of them. So in case there's an issue with one, we can always go to the other. The entire process of controlling the supply chain is very important. Do you have certificates of conformity on your stainless steel? Do you have FDA CFR Title 21 testing results or testing reports for your silicone, for your borosilicate glass, for the all of the materials that you're using? I think that's an easy first step for someone who controls their supply chain, of course. So it's really about knowing what's in these products and stop trying to buy cheap products off Alibaba or off DHgate or through a distributor who doesn't control the supply chain.
In your experience, does cannabis's legal status in the United States and the fact that it is sort of a potentially precarious position, does that create an incentive to kind of have an attitude of well, I need to be as profitable as I can as quickly as possible?
Of course. Of course, if an MSO can say, "Hey, Ohio doesn't ask for heavy metals, so let's just go get the cheapest product I can put out there." Of course, it creates that feeling. On the other hand, when you look at Canada, everyone seems to think that Canada is a small market. It's no bigger than California, which is just one state in the U.S. But Canada is doing things the right way. Canada is requiring, for instance, UL certifications on batteries. A UL 8139 certification on a battery avoids the battery exploding into people's faces, has short circuit protection, has overheat protection, has low power protection. And Canada requiring this automatically sets the stage for safer products for consumers. In the US, we're still at being able to buy any cheap product online, put any oil in there. As long as it passes the 24-hour test, it can go to market. That's the big issue. Canada is requiring stability testing, which is something that we've done with all of our devices, with controller oils. We've even done it with 5 or 10% nitric acid to see how the leaching happens. And if it happens, those are really just basic safety measures that the regulators could be asking for today. And the issue is, if they ask for that today, 75% of the vaping products on the market are gone in the U.S.
Wow. Yeah, so let's switch a little bit over to the kind of current climate and states talking about their economic plans for recovery. We have seen governors in nearby states kind of come together and work together. I'm curious, where do you see cannabis potentially fitting into the conversation, both in terms of its new sort of protected status as an essential service in states where it's already legal, but also I think we're seeing a push recently for more legalization in states across the country. Just curious if you see that trend continuing, and what do you think that means, given that it sounds like there are still safety concerns?
No, I think it's very important. The fact that cannabis was deemed essential um, is a catalyst in legalization. It's a catalyst in widespread adoption of cannabis and taking that away from the negative thoughts in people's heads about what cannabis is. So, cannabis being essential is going to help the industry for sure. It's going to accelerate things. That said, right now it's a very distinguished market because it's also one of the only industries that is not only surviving but starting to thrive during a pandemic like COVID, because people are always wanting some. And when you see all the other industries that have been hit, that's when you really realize that our industry is kind of recession proof, just like the alcohol industry. Because when people are down, when they have trouble going to sleep, when they have PTSD, and I can assure you, we're going to see cases of COVID PTSD moving forward. People are going to turn to products like cannabis. And honestly, I'd rather them turn to cannabis than turn to vodka. So it's definitely a help. The issue is this going to be a priority for the legislators and for the different states moving forward? If it doesn't become a priority, we can already see that the patchwork of regulation in different states is just hampering the industry itself. And we want to make sure that the industry moves forward, and the faster we can have some sort of uniform regulation across states, the faster we'll be able to get these products legalized.
I think you've kind of made an argument for it through this entire discussion, but I'll give you an opportunity to kind of speak to this directly. And I'm curious, if I'm running a company right now and I'm listening to this and I'm going, oh man, I've really got to like take a look at my supply chain and pay attention to, making sure that I'm doing emissions testing and putting that on my packages. And suddenly I'm awash in a whole bunch of new information here. Do you recommend like going ahead and just looking at the European safety standards as kind of like an overzealous but good guideline of like perhaps where to start, just to kind of protect yourself as regulations may shift or change across the country?
100%. 100%. Those are the standards. Now, keep in mind they were originally created for nicotine vaping, but all the bad stuff that you should be looking for in the protocols are the same. I mean, if we're I'm going to take an extreme example. If you're looking for we all know radioactive substances are bad. So if you're already looking for that in nicotine vaping, why wouldn't you just add that to the list of products you're looking for in cannabis vaping? Of course, that's an extreme example, but there are products that are known, whether we're looking at OSHA limits or any kind of other public health organization limits. We know how to look for those. Hell, we're doing it on the oils. Why wouldn't we be doing it on the emissions as well?
I guess the last question here is a little bit more abstract, and I know I don't like to predict myself, but I think there's like an interesting thing happening in the current moment right now where there's this discussion around the economic benefit, which we've talked about, but over the past couple of weeks with protests cannabis has started to enter the discussion a little bit in kind of some scary ways, actually. But people are talking about it again as like a civil rights issue. I guess I'm curious, do you feel like one conversation is more impactful than the other? And when it comes to federal legalization, do you have any like thoughts on that timeline? Is it something that you think has sped up, or are we still kind of locked in the same place we were before?
Honestly, I think we're still kind of locked in the same place. I think things are going to be, as soon as we see the light at the end of the tunnel of this COVID pandemic, things will be able to move a lot faster. But we're essentially, we have some people in the industry saying, hey, this is the time, let's legalize right now. But it doesn't really make sense, because we're not 100% sure of what's going on in the market and in the world. So I think it's going to accelerate once we get through this period, for sure. On the other hand, do we want federal legalization right now, when even inside a state, you're not getting the same results and the same requests from legislators and from regulators? People aren't even able to build consensus within a state. So how long is that going to take to do it federally? Another argument here is, if you look at nicotine vaping, the FDA stepped in through the Tobacco Control Act maybe 4 or 5 years after vaping started to become a thing. Mm-hmm. And they still haven't legislated on it. It's been 6 years now. We're still waiting. So everyone seems to think that federal legalization is going to be written into law and everything's going to change from one day to the next. That's just not true. There are going to be so many public comment periods, so many drafts, so many lobbying efforts that are going to have to get done in between, that we're not looking at being able to roll out and implement a federal legalization for another 4, 5, or 6 years. That's 100% sure. Is the FDA even going to have authority around this, or are they going to create a separate entity that is going to be regulating cannabis? We don't know. And right now, that's going to be the main issue. So as much as it would be great to see federal legalization this year or next year, I still think there's going to be this patchwork within the states for another couple of years. So it's not a reason to stop working on the local side. And going back to the comment about social justice and social equity, the arrests, the past with cannabis has done so much damage in terms of social justice and social equity that there needs to be repentance. There needs to be in every program some way, and I'm just going to use a very simple example. If someone got arrested for cannabis 3 years ago and couldn't go to college for it, well, we got to fix that, and the states have to fix that. We as an industry have to fix that, and I think that's becoming more and more apparent because a lot of the social justice and social equity is because of cannabis.
Arnaud Dumas de Rauly is the CEO and co-founder of the Blinc Group. He's also the chairman of the International ISO Standards on Vaping Products and the chairman of the European CEN Standards on Vaping Products. I want to just thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and we're always available to discuss anything that's safety related.
You can find more cannabis industry reporting at TRICHOMES.com, as well as more great shows like this one. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at highground@TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. The High Ground is produced by David Fortin. I'm Jesse Betend, and thank you for listening.